So my name is Jude Bergkamp. I guess first, thank you for coming on such a beautiful sunny day. I hope we can make it worth your while. So a little introduction for me. I am core faculty up at Antioch University in Seattle. Hi. And also on July 1st, I'll start to become the chair of the program. And lots of people are giving me congratulations, and I think I might need some condolences instead. I have a feeling like who's the sucker that took the chair position. So I do that, and usually there I teach qualitative methods. I also teach psychological assessment, intelligence and personality assessment there. And I do some work in the forensic program there. I'm also clinical faculty here at UW in the Department of Psychiatry up in Seattle. And there I supervise postdoc fellows and some med students around forensic work. And so I also work out at Western State Hospital doing pretrial evaluations. So these are like competency to stand trial, insanity, diminished capacity, things like that. I keep that little gig so that I can have some, cocktail party stories and some exciting things to stay in the classroom, because if I don't, I get a little stagnant and boring. So I think that's a little bit about me formally. In regards to grounded theory specifically, I'm looking forward to kind of share a little bit of my passion for grounded theory. It's one of those things where when I first came in contact with it, it had a language and it was able to articulate something that I already kind of innately knew. It was something that kind of helped me go, oh yeah, I do this already, or this is the way I already approach research. But it was a way that gave it some structure and some language to help me go, yes. And so those I notice are the kinds of concepts and models that I hold dear and I pursue more. So starting with my dissertation, I worked with Barney Glaser, who's the co-founder of grounded theory. And since then, I have been a part of that Grounded Theory Institute, and so we provide consultation for dissertation students who are doing grounded theory work. And so probably once every year, I do this kind of Barney Glaser retreat down to Mill Valley in California, and we sit around for a week and listen to him pontificate about what he calls classic grounded theory. And I love Barney, but he's got his own personality, which I'll make fun of him today a little bit. But it is being recorded, so I might need to think about that. Yeah, that's right. Barney's everywhere. So I think we'll start with just talking a little bit about. Well, first, let me check in. What are people's experience and knowledge about grounded theory? Where are folks at with that? Has anyone done grounded theory projects? Yeah?
I went to, I did my doctorate at UC and some Strauss talk.
Oh, sure, great. Good. Anyone else?
I feel
Emma,
like
you?
I never keep in my mind the difference between Glasserian and Straussian.
It's not quite that important,
Well,
but
that's good.
yeah.
So
You've done some projects there.
School, some projects, yeah.
Okay, great. Anyone else read about it?
I took a lot of qualitative methods classes in my doctoral program, and it was considered not a good method, that, we were highly
Had some
taken away from it.
stigma around it.
Aileen and I have multiple theoretical conversations, so it's really hard to do critical social theory with grounded theory at the same time. So.
Why is that, would you say?
The thing about lacking context, the fact that he's a major racist maybe has a lot to do with it.
I don't know if you heard that story. He was on my dissertation committee, and my dissertation was all on cultural competency and how cultural competency education is done in doctoral programs in psychology. And so once some of the theory started to emerge, some of some differences in opinion also started to emerge, and we had to navigate that. So, yeah, I think I kind of get what you're saying there.
See how you navigated it.
With it, yeah. Well, good. So, so for some, this may be a little redundant, but just as a little refresher, this is the story of grounded theory. There's Barney Glaser right there on the left and Strauss on the right, and that's their kind of seminal book in 1967, The Discovery of Grounded Theory. And I appreciate even the title of that, because it's not something that they would say that they particularly just came up with. They're always consistently talking about it as a discovery, as an emergence, as something that they're sort of watching the process unfold and then talking about what grounded theory is almost after the fact, in a way. So both of these guys were sociologists, and so they were really impacted by symbolic interactionism. And so Mead talks about two kinds of themes that you can see kind of infiltrate and thread through grounded theory. And the first one is this idea that ourselves are social products, that while it may feel like we are in fact defining ourselves or kind of claiming or saying who we are, in actuality, the self is much more of a co-constructed thing or entity that's happening and being shaped all the time. And that the self is also purposive and creative. And I appreciate that in that Mead is always talking about research needs to look for how folks are dealing with their problems. What is the incident, what's the issue, and how are they seeking resolution? Then the other thing is around theory. And Mead says that theory needs to be pragmatic in a way. It needs to be able to be useful and try to kind of solve or address some complex social problems. So that's the idea around symbolic interactionism. And as we go through and as you read more about grounded theory, you'll see the influences of this coming up over and over. So these two guys came together in the 1950s to really study death and dying. And they didn't have any specific clear hypotheses in mind. They were just curious and interested in this phenomenon. And you have to remember 1950s, what was the discourse around death? Right? What was the ideas around death? And so they wanted to get a little more clear about what that was. And so they spent almost 10 years in hospitals observing, sitting, talking with providers, with patients, with families. And through those 10 years, they kind of came up with this typography of sorts around this idea about the awareness of death. And Mark, this was in 1965, I think, like Kubler-Ross's Stages came out in like 1968 or 69 or something like that. So even that hadn't hit quite yet. So in a way, this was quite an influential work. And so their findings really were about these four distinct awareness contexts. And so the first was closed awareness, where the patient was not aware of their own kind of terminal condition, but the nurses and physicians, the providers were. But those providers would not say anything about that kind of condition, that terminal condition. They would, in a way, continue to kind of maintain the fiction that everything's okay or we're working towards recovery. Then the second sort of stage or phase was suspected awareness. So this is where the patient is getting an inkling that maybe recovery is not quite coming, and something, death may be soon. And so they would attempt to kind of test. They would either explicitly or implicitly ask. They would ascribe some meaning to what the providers are doing. And in response, what Glaser and Strauss found was then the providers would sort of avoid or try to keep the talk surface or try to, just kind of not try to validate that kind of suspicion. Then the third is mutual pretense, which is that both the providers and the patient, and also the patient's family in a way, knows that it's a terminal condition, but they all sort of make this kind of probably unconscious or subconscious pact that we're not going to talk about it, that we're going to kind of maintain that fragile illusion that everything's okay and we're moving on. And I don't know, if any of you are married or in families, then I think you don't know anything about this idea about a maintained mutual pretense, but I think it's happening all the time. Anyway, and then finally is this idea of open awareness, where everyone acknowledges the terminal condition. And of course, I think maybe in some psychological terms, we value this the most. I don't know if that's true or not in everyday life, but some would say that that's where we can kind of move forward and actually make some plans. Glaser and Strauss also talked about there's differences in the mode and the time as well. So it's not just the fact of death, but it's also how death is going to occur, probably, and when death is going to occur. And so those different variables also fit into this typography. So that was their first work, and that was in 1965, was this book, The Awareness of Dying. What happened afterwards is folks sort of asked, how did you come up with this, though? What was the method? What did you do? And Glaser says that for about a year, he didn't really particularly know. He just said, oh, we did these things. And so then he and Strauss came together and wrote the book, The Discovery of Grounded Theory, in a way sort of almost in retrospect, piecing together what they did and how they came to these conclusions. And so grounded theory, again, is in a way, I think, something about the process and emergence. That's really at the heart of the idea of grounded theory. Any thoughts or questions about that? No? Pretty clear? Okay. So, yeah, there has been somewhat of a, in the insular, if I can say, kind of nerdy world of grounded theory, which I'm a part of the nerdy world of grounded theory, there has been lots of kind of dramatic shifts and changes. There was the kind of famous divorce, if you will, of Glaser and Strauss, and what is grounded theory, and blah, blah, blah. In a nutshell, we can say that all of these, I think, all of the different kinds of movements and shifts have, in a way, been a reaction or a response to the field of research, specifically in qualitative research. And so Strauss, I think, broke off with another colleague, Corbin, and wrote what is most folks now know as grounded theory. And the specific pieces of Straussian grounded theory is that I think he kept noticing that especially beginning grounded theorists needed some sort of structure. And that with the grounded theory as it was, there wasn't a good set of sort of procedures that could be followed. And so one of the big things that Strauss did was to say, number one, grounded theory is a qualitative method, while before the going kind of claim was that grounded theory was neither qualitative or quantitative. You could use mixed methods, but everything was data in a way. And so by him saying it's actually, he wanted to establish grounded theory in the qualitative kind of school. And so he did that, and also he kind of set out this structure or these steps for analysis, for data collection and analysis. And so with that, Glaser was shocked, I think, in a certain way, and he came back with a pretty heavy rebuke to that. And so that split is now kind of called, Glaser calls what he teaches and what he does classic grounded theory, and then we have Straussian grounded theory. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, we see another split with Karen Shamaz with constructivist grounded theory. And so that was, I think, another kind of response to the discourse in qualitative research around the fallacy of positivism and the acknowledgement of subjectivity and the role that that plays in all phases of research. And so she very explicitly applied the ideas of social constructivism to grounded theory, and also sort of integrated some more kind of procedures and steps. And so what you will notice in general is that beginning students will like the either Chamazi or Straussian way because there's some nice, clear steps that can be taken. And in response to that, in classic GT, what we try to do is offer lots of coaching and seminars and things like that to kind of work beginning dissertation students and researchers through that process. So any thoughts and questions about that? It took me like 10 minutes to build that arrow. Can anyone say good job on the arrow? Okay, good.
So when you were doing your dissertation, what attracted you to the classic versus any of the other?
Yeah, my dissertation again was on cultural competency and how that's being, and you call it multiculturalism or diversity, and how that education occurs, specifically in doctoral programs in psychology, but I was interested in it all the way around. How does that happen? And so I just felt like, and I've read and kind of investigated all of them, but that classic GT allowed me to sort of do this kind of constant comparison sort of analysis that we'll talk about later. And it just fit with the way that I naturally investigate and kind of move through the research process. So I would say that is the biggest one. It didn't give what others might find as comforting kind of guideposts, right? To me, felt like a lot of restriction, and I wanted to be able to move more freely in order to answer that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. And in GT in general, I do feel like just the idea of grounded theory as having a open area of kind of substantive kind of exploration, which is kind of casting a wide net, seemed to fit in the issues around cultural competency versus some other methods which really would require me to do a literature review, identify the gaps in the literature, and then run my hypothesis out of that, where I felt like the whole body of literature in a way didn't fit this idea of cultural competency as I kind of thought about it. So I wanted to allow something more to emerge than just being constrained with that kind of model. Is that helpful? Yeah. Any other questions or more oohs and ahs on my arrow? So then, look at that. I did that too yesterday. Pretty awesome. So, yeah, exactly. So one of the, I think the incredible things really about grounded theory is that it did kind of flip this idea of research on its head versus what we were talking about in general with the basic sort of boiled down research approach of sort of having a hypothesis mostly born out of a comprehensive lit review, right? And then you've got the research design, and then you collect, and then you analyze, and you report the results. And each one is sort of this kind of step by step. They're all distinct stages. And so there could be stages just so that we can talk to each other and say, hey, where are you at? Oh, I'm in collection. Oh, where are you at? Oh, I'm in analysis. Like, whew, I feel like I'm making some progress, right? And so in grounded theory, there's some pretty interesting discussion around what is the effect of the results on the construction of that hypothesis. that hypothesis is actually derived from either identification of the gaps in the current research, or some idea that comes from, like, maybe in here, like maybe my frontal lobe, sometimes my limbic, but it's coming from one person's head in a way, or a couple. And grounded theory would assert that maybe what we need to do is root our hypothesis in the pragmatic everyday lives of the participants who are dealing with that phenomena. And so what we need to do is go to the people who are experiencing it and trying to resolve it, and allow a rooted hypothesis to emerge from that sort of interaction. And from there, then we start to do this constant comparative approach where we are collecting data while we're analyzing data, while we're memoing, while we're exploring and writing about our own biases, and doing all of that in a way at the same time, in sort of an iterative sort of process. And out of that can emerge basically what is it that these folks are dealing with, and then how are they trying to resolve those sorts of issues. And and then interestingly enough, then something like in the dissertation, then the literature review actually happens at the end. So that kind of theory emerges, and then we take that theory to the literature and see if it's confirmed or denied, or how it fits within everything. And so it's a very interesting idea to pose to a dissertation committee who never kind of has heard about grounded theory in a way. So a lot of, I think, the consultative work that we have is that we just talk to a lot of dissertation committees and talk about how that process works. So, so if I could ask someone to read this first section for me. Like, what is grounded theory, that first section there? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, good.
Classic grounded theory uses an inductive approach to generate hypotheses which explain how participants in a studied substantive area resolve their main concern.
Thank you. Someone else read the second? Yes.
Classic grounded theory aims at generating conceptual theories abstract of time, place, and people.
Mm-hmm. And the third?
Classic grounded theory
Thank
studies differ from other qualitative approaches by presenting explanatory concepts rather than descriptions.
Thank you. So some of the core ideas around grounded theory is that, again, the result is a rooted hypothesis, not one that's constrained with just within the literature review or my own kinds of ideas. Second, that a grounded theory is different from other qualitative methods in that it's not looking for descriptives. It's looking for concepts. It's looking for a concept that, in a way, explains most, if not all, of the data that is collected. And the idea is that, or the hope in ways, is that if you can get, Glaser always talks about, I want the concept of the concept on the concept. Like, he just wants to keep getting more and more conceptual. And, excuse me, the idea with that is that with some qualitative research, it's great, like phenomenology, in that we kind of understand the lived experience of that individual in that situation. And yet for grounded theory, we want possibly a conceptual idea that then can be exported more easily to other situations and assist in other complex social problems. And so we don't want it to be constricted and constrained to the person, the time, the setting, the context. So some of the most popular kind of grounded theory principles. One is that we want to keep things rooted in the data. And Glaser there's lots of talk around objectivity, subjectivity, what all of that means. And in classic grounded theory, there's more of a ideal or a practice in a way, that the researcher is basically continually just collecting the data, talking to folks, interviewing, analyzing, and that's the source of where the thoughts or ideas come from. And then there's this idea of allowing these things to emerge and not to be forced. And we'll get to kind of some of the analysis process, but that's the place where I think a lot of researchers as well get kind of averse to grounded theory, because it's this idea of it is this emphasis on kind of riding the waves of ambiguity and just continuing to collect and continuing to analyze until that core variable or idea or concept really emerges from the data. And then again, like we've talked about before, it's conceptual rather than descriptive. And that a good grounded theory needs to meet a couple of criteria. So it needs to be relevant to the participants. So once that kind of core variable or theory emerges, when we go back and introduce it to the participants, we want to see that sort of like, yeah, that's it. That helps, I mean, that actually puts words to an experience I didn't know, or that helps me understand things in a very different way. So what we want to see it being relevant. We want to see it have some fit to that social context and to that situation. And it needs to be modifiable. So we don't kind of have a grounded theory, patent it, say this is it, put it up on the shelf and let dust collect. It's the idea that if it's a good grounded theory, then it needs to continue to be able to change and modify with the context or situation that it's in. So I'm feeling like the need for a story. I don't know why. So, so one of my favorite projects that Glaser tells his story about is he did a project in, I think, the late 60s, early 70s, and the unions in San Francisco came to him and they were saying something about how out of all the different city workers, window washers stayed around the longest. Like they had the most sustainability of all like city workers. And so like a good grounded theorist, he was like, I wonder why. Let's go try and find out. So he went and spent some time, talking to all these window washers and also hanging out with them a little bit and going up and down, which he says was a terrifying experience, and just kind of immersing himself in that. And the grounded theory that came out was what he called the scheduling of voyeurism, or voyeuristic scheduling was the grounded theory. And it's something that he would have never assumed going in. It would have never kind of arose in his mind that would be remotely anything about the hypothesis, right? But that's what emerged from the data. That was the theory that held it all together. And the idea was that the thing that kept these folks coming back to window washing was their stories that they constructed as they would clean one window and look in and see the scene. And then they got to move to the next window and see the scene again. And then the question was, well, after you saw it, don't you get bored and want to go get another job? And they were like, no, because we have created this system in which we all switch buildings and we shift times. And so that shifting of times and buildings provided the variety enough for them to continue to go through the same window at a different time and construct more interesting storylines about it, right? Or new buildings to get more. And so there were other factors with the pay. It was okay, the benefits were good. It was kind of a fun job to be way up there, I guess, at certain times for some folks, right? And so, but that's an example of something that was the grounded theory that came out. Now, does it stand the test of time? I don't know. We haven't gone and done it any others, but we would. If Glaser would say, well, we are coming against, we're encountered with another issue that seems like this, we could then pull that grounded theory off the shelf and go, well, how does scheduling voyeurism work for you guys? You know, if you guys are getting bored in your faculty positions, maybe we should schedule some voyeurism. I don't know, would that work or not work? You could switch classrooms, switch buildings. Sometimes you might wish you could switch students, but that's how it goes, right? And so that's an example, kind of a wild and crazy example of the grounded theories that come out. And you know, and he can throw out some pretty wild and crazy ones. Now, publishable, not publishable, you know, kind of what's the veracity of it? Those are all other issues, I guess. But just to kind of bring to light, that's a great example, kind of a lively example, I think, of a good grounded theory. So any other thoughts with any of this?
Can you talk a little bit more about the conceptual versus descriptive? So when you say descriptive, do you mean like just purely laying the scene? Like how is other qualitative methods not also conceptual? Is it making a distinction between that, or maybe you can just talk about that?
Yeah, well, I think the way he talks about, he's not like in classic grounded theory, it doesn't seem like any of us are really interested in making us distinct from something else or comparing in a way. But the emphasis he has is, let's say in open coding, I go through and I usually code things like, oh, that's this emotion, this kind of emotion, or they're talking about this topic, or oh, they seem to fit into this group. And so that's okay for some open coding. But he keeps pushing for what's the concept? So the question he wants us to ask is, what is this person dealing with? What's their kind of issue? And then how are they seeking resolution? And then we're supposed to ask that in a way, and with every line I read. And so when I come with some of my open codes, or you know, those groups of codes, it usually is much more descriptive than what a grounded theory wants. They keep wanting to get conceptual. So instead of what or who, you know, we're looking for kind of how or why, I guess. Yeah. My thoughts, yeah.
I'm curious about talking about taking the voyeuristic scheduling off the shelf and applying it into another context.
Yeah.
At that point, it seems like you're shifting out of doing grounded theory, right? Like you're sort of going back through the process where now you're taking an existing
theory
framework or theory and applying it. So
yes.
Does that then loop, I'm assuming at some point you loop that back around for new things that emerge in the new context, as well as testing whether or not that applies.
Exactly. So it's really like grounded theory. I think of it, and I don't know about other folks, but I think of it as a grounded theory is a rooted hypothesis in an area that either we haven't studied, or I think there's something else there that is just not there's like a dearth of literature about it, there's a dearth of understanding about it. And then the product would be a rooted hypothesis that then I could test with other methods, with other approaches.
So it's sort of a purely exploratory.
It's kind of an exploratory way, and But that's how I think about it. I think other folks use it in different ways. Yeah.
My impression is when you emphasized on conceptualization, so it's a method of approach that draw qualitative research closer to quantitative research in terms of how to generalize the findings or how to use this concept in a different situation.
Yes. There's an idea of generalization, but not in the kind of psychometric way that we think about it in in a quantitative sense. But it is more of a generalization of the theory, of the explanation. So while that theory of scheduled voyeurism was distinct in a way to that group during that time, that idea or that theory may apply to other workers or other groups who can't sustain and maybe need something else. Yeah, that's right. So there is that piece of generalization that occurs. And that's what he talks about, exportability in a way. Yeah. Any other thoughts? And so finally, there's the kind of classic Glasserian dictum of everything is data. So not only is it the interviews themselves and the things that are coming up during the interviews, and it's not just the transcriptions, but it's my thoughts about those transcriptions, and it's my memoing as I'm transcribing. But it can also be any thoughts that I have when I'm doing the dishes or when I'm pretending to listen to my wife, but I'm actually thinking about the grounded project that I'm working on. All of that is data, and that it can be. There can be a piece that kind of arrives from watching television or talking with a friend or whatever, or just a kind of a spontaneous sort of source. But everything during that process is data. And so that's another part that kind of gets tricky or a little controversial around how do you track it? How is it transparent? Right? And how can someone else sort of understand the process? And that's where, documentation and sort of having some kind of system in place, I think, is important. For me specifically, if I'm sitting on grounded theory dissertation committees, then I really encourage beginning students to use something like Deduce or Atlas TI or something like that as an anchor, right, to kind of help me track with them how did this theory emerge? Tell me the story and show me the sources. So that's my really incredibly pretty tree. Am I getting any props for that one? Ding, ding, ding. Okay, thank you. All right. So next we move into analysis, which is, again, doesn't have this structure that some other qualitative methods do. And so it requires, I think, a lot more. It just requires a little bit more reading and understanding and mentoring of students who are doing this for the first time. So grounded theory starts with what Glaser would talk about as theoretical sensitivity, and both Strauss and Glaser in classic grounded theory would talk about theoretical sensitivity, which is this idea that I think this is their term for how to deal with bias or something like this, or what the split between objectivity and subjectivity is. But for example, the two of them had just lost close members of their family prior to their starting that study on death and dying. And they said that even that experience provided them with some kind of sensitivity towards the material that they were working on. Like for me, I had worked doing kind of multicultural education and anti-oppressive kind of work for 10 or 15 years prior to doing that dissertation. And so some would say that provided a sense of theoretical sensitivity to it. But it also requires me making sure I'm memoing and writing and kind of being clear about what are my thoughts and what's coming up in the data. And it's not to throw those thoughts out. Those are thrown into the hopper as well. But it doesn't drive the way that I'm looking at the data or what's emerging from the data. And that's just the tricky part in, I think, all of this kind of work. So the idea is that from that area of kind of theoretical subjectivity, and I don't really know if Glaser had any expertise in window washing or unions, but he did it anyway. So you could say he doesn't have any theoretical sensitivity in that example. But so you have that kind of general area of knowledge or understanding, and then you create what's called this grand tour question, the substantive area of interest. So I was interested in this area of cultural competency and how it's taught in doctoral programs. I didn't go in with any kind of hypothesis per se. I did have my own thoughts and opinions and ideas, which I made sure to kind of document kind of as a foregrounding effort and work with my committee and other folks with it. But I wasn't pushing, I was simply exploring. And then I go in and start to talk. I talk to faculty, I talk to students, I talk to folks who have taken it, I talk to folks who are about to take it, I talk to folks who are taking those classes right now. So example with mine, it was around this idea that in most doctoral programs you have this one class called like multiculturalism. And so you take it and you get an okay grade and you pass, and then you sort of go, all right, I think I'm good. I've got that down. Check the obligatory box, right? And we also did some surveys and some outcome measures and took a look at the curriculum. So my grounded theory was not just qualitative in nature. I had some quantitative numbers to kind of compare. We had about 8 or 9, now we have, I think, 10 cohorts, 10 years of these classes in a couple different programs to compare. So once I start even thinking about it, Glaser would say the whole process begins. I'm not in just one stage or another. I am in this constant comparative process. So the second I start thinking about it, the second I start foregrounding, the second I start talking to someone, in that talking, while after that talk, I'm walking to my computer to transcribe while I'm transcribing, then the data collection and the coding and the analysis are happening all at the same time in this kind of spiraling, iterative process that's not broken up into chunks. And the idea is really that as I am even analyzing that first interview, I'm creating some concepts, hopefully, in the open coding process that when I go to my second interview, I'm already thinking about those open coding, those concepts and seeing, do they fit? Yes, no, nope, then out. What else is emerging? What else is going on? And I just keep going through that process. And that process does involve the open coding, and then some in other grounded theories, it's got the kind of axle coding and different types, right? But it's basically the same. We do some open codes, they kind of collapse or distill into some categories, and those categories have some commonality with meaning and pattern. And I'll talk about commonality in a second. And then finally, what in classic grounded theory is called the core variable emerges. And this is like the birth of a child or something. Like, this is a very exciting time, okay? It's like you can feel it being pregnant, and then bang, here it comes, the core variable happened, woo! Or I think the core variable happened until I go to one of these seminars and I say it, and they go, no, that's not the core variable. It's like, oh gosh. And that's the whole part where you want to have your kid at a certain time, but your kid's going to come when they come, kind of thing. That's a terrible metaphor. I just made that up. But there's something about, that's the other part of grounded theory that I think there's that ambivalence, there's that ambiguity that's tough to kind of see through in a way. So let's see here. So yeah, the deal with commonality, when the core variable emerges, well, let me go to the next slide. And everyone's appreciating my spirally tree. Okay, thank you. Good, at least you, okay, I appreciate that. So then, in grounded theory, we have some criteria for that core variable. And so let me go back real quick. So just to kind of to make it a little more applicable. So in my study on cultural competency in those classes, I kept talking to folks, and folks kept saying things like, either they said, yeah, they really like the class and they think it's really important and blah, blah, blah. But some people would say, I'm a little afraid of going into that class. And I'm a little afraid of what we're going to learn and talk about in that class. And the discussions kind of get me edgy. Or they said something in there and I felt really bad and I don't want to go back to that class. Or something like, after I take this class, I don't really want to talk about that stuff anymore. And so there was something that started to emerge around an aversion to the material. And so then the question started being, well, what was that? And how did you deal with that, right? And so a lot of times what they would say, what it appeared to happen was that when we would talk in the curriculum about person-to-person differences, then things would go okay. Because the kind of theory was, as long as I respect how you're different and how I'm different, and we can kind of be understanding and respectful, everything's going to be all right. But when the curriculum kind of bumped to, and I don't know if, the going curriculum is sort of like these books that have chapters on like, this is how you deal as a clinician with African American folks, and this is how you deal with Asian American folks, right? And this is how you deal, blah, blah, blah. So there's a chapter each week on all the difference. There's not per se a chapter on like, this is how you deal with white people, if you're a person of color. There wasn't a chapter there. And so that was one, so we called that kind of the festival boothing of curriculum. And then the other piece was then when we started to bump into issues of power and privilege, where, okay, so you're telling me that since I'm a man and she's a woman, that we're not equal, and as long as we just have some mutual respect, that's not enough? Like that actually, just by me being a man, I have more power and privilege than she does? The impact of that had some students kind of reeling. And so the core variable that emerged in that project was something I called agent shame. And agent shame is this idea that I have this agency, I have this status of privilege and power, which probably is due to birth. It wasn't something that I meant to do or something, you know. But simply by being a man and you being a woman, then I have this upper hand kind of with you, and I can't even it back out no matter how nice I am. And so I have this sort of emotional reaction to it, which I thought was this idea of kind of shame, because it's not something that I did to her, right, to make that happen. It's about me and who I am. And so what we found was the students would have these varying types of reactions to that experience of agent shame. And so agent shame then became what we call the core variable. And so the core variable needs to meet a couple of criteria, or actually 8, so I shouldn't say a couple. It's quite demanding, that Glaser. So Glaser says, first, the core variable serves as an anchor for which the theory scaffolds on. And so the criteria for the core variable 1, it must be central to all the categories. So when I broke out all the different kind of conceptual categories, when I applied agent shame as a concept to it, I went, yep, okay, that makes sense. And then 2, it needs to occur, sometimes it can occur frequently in the data or reveal itself during coding. So it wasn't an implicit idea that I just came up with. It just kept coming up in the data. The naming it of agent shame, I named it agent shame to kind of put some words to a concept. And as an aside, as well, Glaser talks about this idea of a license to conceptualize. Like it's not an actual license that he gives you, but he's like giving you permission. He says that in a grounded theory, he would like for us to avoid any sort of jargon of the field and instead actually even make up some words in order to describe what the concept is, in order to help really root it in the data. And so scheduling voyeurism was not a jargony concept that was there, and neither was agent shame. It's kind of close to white guilt in a way, right? But it's got a couple of little distinct kind of features of it. And so the third criteria is that the core variable needs to form natural connections between the categories. That 4, it has relevance for the participants and implication for the field. And that's where you see that kind of Mead's idea about what a theory is good for. It needs to be pragmatic. And 5, it needs to carry the theory through the main concerns of the participants. So as I go through the main concerns and hear about all the issues, if I apply agent shame to those, it fits. It goes, oh, that's a concern about this sort of perspective on agent shame, or this reaction to agent shame. And then 6 is that it needs to account for the widest variation of the coding patterns. 7, that it needs to meet a level of saturation where when you get new data, or if I go and interview another student, I'm probably going to hear the same variety of stuff around that, right? And then 8 is that it captures most of the dimensions of the problem. So the difference that I want to emphasize here, though, is that while that core variable, let's say in my case, agent shame, when I applied it to everything else, it seemed to hold it all together and give it some kind of congruence and understanding. Yeah, do you have a question?
I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
or maybe you're about to explain it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
Okay.
but How did it meet all those criteria? Like, how did it come up, say, if you're interviewing women or people of color? Because what you described sounds like from the sort of dominant, quote, dominant perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm wondering how it manifested itself.
Well, the interesting thing in some of the curriculum is we're dealing with the, like one of the models we use is the addressing model from Pamela Hayes. And so it breaks up all these kinds of dimensions of power and privilege. And hardly any of us walk around as a full, what I call a super agent, right? So most of us hold both statuses of agent and target. And so in some of the curriculum, when we're looking at how is it that we cultivate cultural competency, and does that require that we not only explore those parts of ourselves that are target, but that we also explore what power and privilege we have as we walk through the world, and that we may be unconscious with it. And so for most of the students, it was that part that we found kind of impacted them the most.
So I'm curious, did it come up, was that sense of shame different, say, for African Americans?
Yeah.
Did it have a sort of a different manifestation than it did for white?
It absolutely did, because what would happen in the class, they would talk about how they hated that class because, like, let's say white folks would be hit with that insight, and then they would kind of say some stuff, you know, which for them was from where they were coming from at their developmental stage, but then other students of color would then get reactionary about that. And then the faculty member was not able to really kind of negotiate that discussion very well. And so that made those students not like the class and those other students not like the class, right? And so we were looking at what was the reason why, let's say, and we did some research on, in those classes, number one, the faculty would almost always be faculty of color. And number two, they would almost always be the youngest or newest faculty to teach the class. No faculty wanted to teach that class. And number three, that class by far, no matter who the faculty was, would get the lowest ratings from students out of any class. And so we were kind of thinking and considering that data as well. I hope, yeah.
And can I just chime in, because I was on your committee? And my understanding of all of this is also that this is the beauty of this style or this method, is that agent shame isn't a descriptor, it's the concept. So it's not tied to one person. So either I'm the agent or the target or whatever, but agent shame is the thing that's happening between us in our interaction. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I always kind of understand it as that's what's going on. That's not what this person has or doesn't have. That's what I'm reacting to no matter whether I have it or not.
Yeah,
That's the thing happening between us as we interact.
That's right. Like the rooted hypothesis out of that would say that the reason for adverse emotionality in those classes is due to agent shame. It's not that everyone in the room experiences it, but it's that once that drops into the room, that's when adverse emotionality occurs. And usually after that happens, that's when students will say, I don't want any more of whatever that was. Yeah. Yeah.
If everything is data, how do you limit it and not get like totally overwhelmed?
Overwhelmed,
Like,
and- and when does it
interviews and
stop?
Classroom observations, and you're like talking to yourself in the shower.
Yeah, exactly
How
right.
do you make some
And just
sort of
watch,
limit so that it is beneficial
watching
for
window washers all
note
day.
to self? Be quiet, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So these are very, very common questions, like where's the parameters? Where's the boundaries? Where does it end? How do I know when I'm done? All of those sorts of things. And so, good question. Right? Good question. But I've just found in experience that it's almost, there are these kind of stages of a GT project, and that that kind of ambiguity and unclarity, occurs for a certain amount of time. But almost always, I don't know, but for me it's like, I don't want to put any number on it, but to me it's like around 10 or 12 interviews, like these concepts start to bubble up. And then as you keep doing this iterative process, it starts moving much, much faster until that core variable starts to emerge. And once that happens, it's almost like when I got to that, I would just be talking to everybody. And when I would, it'd be like, yep, there it is again and again and again. Now you can make an argument, well, that's confirmation bias or something, whatever that may be, right? That could be true. But when I go back to folks and say, well, this is the theory, and this is the kind of typography that I created around that, I get this feedback of relevance and fit and modifiability that makes it a grounded theory.
And obviously you would include that in whatever book or article you're writing in terms of doing a member check.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So you're doing the memoing, you're doing the member checking. You can use all of those sorts of techniques. It's not like you can't use them or not use them. But you're right in that, it's not like you could particularly say, I'm going to do 10 interviews, then I'm going to analyze them, then I'm going to do this with it, And I think you could. It wouldn't be kind of the classic Glasserian grounded theory way, but I think it's more about the approach that you're taking to the analysis that's very different. Yep. Yeah.
This may be too in the weeds, but how are 1 in 5 different?
Yeah, it must be central to other categories and carries through the main concerns. So the categories are these sort of meta conceptions that were derived from the open codes. And so those could be different from what were the main concerns of the participants. Like in my study, the main concerns of the participants were like, I don't want to take that class again, or I'm dreading taking that class now, or I hate those students over there who are always so PC and just keep, whatever that may be. And so the core variable hits both. Yeah.
This actually raises another question. So most of my qualitative research is content analysis, archival data, news coverage, these kinds of
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Where there really isn't a main concern of the participants in the sense that I'm imposing that concern on them. So I'm wondering how that fits within this. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, yeah. And so there's grounded theories done with content analysis and all kinds of different things. But I think the questions of what's the main concern, within the content, what are the writers really writing about? What are they trying to reach resolution for, and how are they doing that? How is that purposive and creative in a way? Is what we'd be asking, no matter what it would be. Yeah. What was I saying? Okay, yeah, I remember now. So this idea about commonality, and so I think there's some approaches where you distill all of the data down into what's the most common amongst all the participants. That's not in grounded theory. So, for example, in mine, it was really only one student that could more clearly articulate than everyone else this idea around agent shame. It was this white male student who said, this hit me in this way, this is what I was experiencing, this is what I said, this is how other people reacted to me, this is how I felt, da 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 da. And so it could even be that a little piece of outlying data over here from that one participant could indicate the concept. But it's the concept itself that needs to then be, you need to make a case in how it applies overall to all the different participants. Does that make sense to folks? Yeah, yeah.
Another question. So what are the steps that you use to kind of interrogate your own social location and the lenses and the biases that you may be bringing to bear on the data? Because it always strikes me that move from kind of what is and what we see, it's all, we have to constantly be undergoing reflexivity.
Absolutely.
You know, to say, well, how is my particular social location, my race, class, whatever,
Influencing
my
and
profession,
shaping.
all those things. You know, how is that? Because I don't know if age and shame would have been what I would have come out with if I saw the data.
Yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
But I just think that's a really important piece. Otherwise, we run the danger of reproducing what we've always kind of criticized quantitative research, for this sort of eye of God-like approach to saying, okay, this is what I see.
Right, and yet I think in qualitative, we are constantly struggling with our own identity in the shadow of that. And so even issues around generalizability or replicability, and the seeking objectivity in a way, or somehow being aware of our own biases, that's one thing. But that idea of kind of somehow isolating them or putting boundaries on them or not allowing it to influence, I don't think it's possible either. Absolutely.
I think in the sense that we are part of the data.
Yeah.
It only becomes part of the data when we actually are able to recognize it.
And I think that's the idea around this thing about emergence versus forced, rooting ourselves in the data. So there might be a concept that arrives out of the data, but then does it consistently apply to it? And there is some memoing, and we wouldn't call it bracketing per se, but there's that memoing thing. And there's also a big kind of, there are big sections in grounded theory books around consultation and kind of transparency, having folks read through it and us needing to make sure we can make this kind of argument in a way about how that emerged and how that applies. So. Yeah, I think it's the constant quandary we have in lots of qualitative research. Yeah, yeah. So, so let me think.
Just because there's no clock in here.
Yeah. Are we? Oh, okay. Okay.
I didn't know if you wanted to jump to your.
Oh yeah, I'm okay. I can be done with GT. Are you GT'd out? You good? Okay. Good. All right. So. Now I'll just do a quick little run through of my super nerdy last 3 or 4 years of stuff. I don't think I can get through all of this at all, but maybe instead I'll tell you a couple stories, I guess. So what got me really interested in this is a couple different things. As a clinician, first off, from like 2001 to 2007 or 8, I worked in high schools as like a mediator. I had this convoluted title, anger management conflict resolution specialist or some kind of thing. My card was giant. But what it really came down to was if kids were fighting, I tried to get them to stop fighting. But during that time, I saw the advent of this thing called MySpace. And the way that MySpace collided into like the developmental stages of adolescent girls who were best friends, and suddenly I can quantify you as from number 1 as my best friend to number 2 because I'm going to put my boyfriend in there, and the chaos that would occur after the fact was riveting to me. At first I didn't know things are blowing up in my schools, and I could not understand why. And once I kind of started clicking around on the sparkly, loud MySpace thing, and later on Facebook, I realized, oh, this is this new phenomenon for me. Another one was I had this private practice client, and she was in the process of divorce. She was coming to me for kind of like, how do we make this divorce amicable? How do I construct a parenting plan? She wanted to do things like that. It literally took me, what I would kind of brag as a empathetic, astute listener, it literally took me 2 sessions to realize, like, she's talking about her new relationship, and her new boyfriend, her fiance, is actually not inhabiting like this world. That she is having that whole relationship in a place called Second Life, which is like this virtual world in which she has a job and she owns a home and she's going to get married to this guy. And it's so impactful for her that constitutes for her and her husband an affair that should equate in a divorce. Another was, my last one, was I worked for for kind of a CPS Child Protective Services service called Family Preservation Services. So when the kid's at imminent risk of placement, they send like a therapist into the home as like this last-ditch effort to try to keep the kid in the home and stabilize things out. So I had a single mom who was charged with neglect. And I walked into her apartment, and I remember thinking, this is the most filthy apartment I've ever seen in my life. Like, you could not see the floor because there was just like trash and clothes everywhere, except for this trail that went from the refrigerator to the bathroom to her computer. And that's where she lived. Like, that's where she inhabited most of her time and space versus her child. And so what it got me really wondering, what the heck is going on, right? Now on the flip side, I think we can all talk about the brief history of video games and technology. Some of us in the room are what we call like digital foreigners, and others are digital immigrants, and others are digital natives, right? These are some of the categories we're using in a little bit of the research we have. And so for me, I would consider myself a digital immigrant. Like, I didn't really grow up from the beginning in this time, but by 12 I had an Atari, and by 13 I had programmed a little yellow ball to bounce around on my Commodore 64 and thought, like, this is amazing. And I play video games and computer games and do all of that kind of thing, right? While I wouldn't say I'm a digital native. One of the milestones we've marked for a digital native is that when a question comes up, instead of looking to the person next to them and asking, oh, do you know about this? Instead, they just Google it, like instantly. It's like question, Google. There's no interaction. There's nothing else that occurs there, right? So there are these kind of generational milestones in a way for that. So out of that, I got very curious about what was going on. And as a grounded theorist, I went into it really kind of wondering what was happening. And out of that, let me just flip here, I think. Out of that, I got, sorry, don't look at this, sorry, I'm just flipping aimlessly right now. So out of that came a more distinct interest in avatars, in the way that we represent and characterize ourselves in virtual environments. So that can include a video game and how we choose that avatar. It could be in Facebook, what we choose to like or not like, what we choose to post or not post. But it's a way that we are representing ourselves in kind of a virtual environment. And what does that mean? And what's the interaction or interplay then, or relationship between myself in analog world and myself in digital world, or that characteristic of myself in digital world, right? And so what we know is there's lots of research on emotions and on ways that we can kind of immerse ourselves when we are, let's say, watching a movie that we definitely experience lots of emotionality when watching a movie, right? Because we're kind of vicariously living through those characters. The distinct part in video games is there's that aspect of volition, meaning that I can have some choice in how I move through that world, and I can actually maybe inhabit something different in myself. So one statistic is that almost 40% of users will ascribe a characteristic to their avatar that is opposite to their own, like diametrically opposed to themselves, right? So if I was to create an avatar in a video game, I might choose a white woman. And actually 40% of folks actually choose characteristics that are very different from them. And then they would say that they due to that characteristic, that actually kind of influences and drives their gameplay or their decision making. And so then they would kind of, it creates this sort of third phenomena, which is their avatar. And their avatar could be very distinct from themselves, but yet kind of a part of themselves. Does this all make sense, or I'm just yapping away? Okay. So I think with that, I'll close on, this is all just kind of psychobabble stuff. But the thing I'm most interested in is this idea of avatar. And so in Hindi, the word avatar it's a Sanskrit word, and it means kind of like the descent of a deity to the earth, like the representation of a deity here on earth. And so what we're really curious about is how does the creation and manifestation of an avatar in these virtual environments, how does that reveal something about who I am, who I want to be, the values that I have? And so there's something called the Proteus effect, which says that number one, avatar appearance influences in-game behavior. So it's basic social psych. So if I choose, like, if a team has a black jersey on, they're gonna incur more penalties. In the same way, if I choose a certain kind of a race, if I use an angry dwarf with an axe, I'm probably going to use it more than if I have something else, right? But also that changes in that there's a relationship between in-game or virtual environment behavior and then what they call face-to-face behavior, but I kind of call it like analog behavior versus digital or something like that. But that there is an interaction between the two, especially when there are factors that we can measure around immersion or around identification between me and that avatar in some way. So to bring this a little bit to light, there was a great photo shoot that was done on folks who really identified with their avatars and said that they've experienced a sense of immersion and identity. And a lot would say that through their avatar, in some way, shape, or form, it has helped them, or it provides them with an environment to kind of maybe experiment with parts of themselves that they can't do in their analog life. And just as an aside, there's some pretty active work, I'm sure some of you have heard, on kind of using this technology for like PTSD. So like at the VA, there's a whole program on which we kind of take an inventory of what were some of the traumatic events. We build a program around that. They have these Oculus glasses that they use, and then you can kind of titrate in the stimuli of the trauma. We also have some research going on around using this with folks in the autism spectrum, like specifically like kind of high Asperger's kinds of things, so that they can exercise some more social skills in a lower stake environment, right? It's not like the analog world with if you mess up, you may lose that relationship forever, or you're not going to have a friend. In those virtual worlds, you can kind of mess around with proximity and level of interaction and type of interaction. So here, this photographer is really looking at what's the identity, and so he gave very specific instructions to the folks about, please try to depict yourself in the way that you would normally in your analog life, and then show us the picture that you love of your avatar. And so some you'll see, the questions to ask are, how are they similar? How are they different? And in what direction is the relationship occurring? So like in this one, there was a conversation going around, well, we know that there's only a certain amount of options for you to characterize your avatar in different games, right? And so I doubt that he was able to choose that distinct head tilt that his avatar is doing, but did the avatar actually influence him to head tilt in that same way, right? So this is Eve, one of my dissertation students is working with the developers of Eve. Their avatar is actually a ship. So it's not particularly a person. They can't choose a person, they have facial features and all of that, but it's a ship. And so this person who plays Eve a lot, he wanted his picture to show his ship, which was his kind of super scary truck filled with lots of firearms. So similar in which direction, different how? Got the clenched fists going on. So the question also is, it feels to me like every month a new game comes out or a new environment comes out that allows for more choice or more volition around how to not only inhabit in the choices that are made, but how to represent yourself in a virtual world. And so I think with each technology that occurs, the question kind of comes up in yet a different kind of way. So, with that, yeah. I think it's one of her. No, that's right. That's true. But the baby sure is happy, isn't it? It's not nap time for the little one. Yeah.
Sorry.
So, thoughts or questions around that little crazy tidbit?
I think it's interesting. It's only going to become more and more interesting. I mean, I think eventually we're all going to have an avatar somewhere.
Yeah.
With some representation. I think even at UW we have our photos, so when I send an email, I see a photo.
Right. Like
We'll see you all
which
day.
photo is that? That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, and another dissertation student I have is doing his on this game called Ingress. And so the other kind of agenda we have is really to kind of depathologize the discourse of psychology around video games. And so when you say video games to a big group of psychologists, we all shake our heads and think it's addictive and it increases aggression and it makes kids go out and shoot folks. Well, I don't know how much you can say that when it's like almost like 60% of everybody plays video games of some kind, and it's most folks do. And if you're digital immigrant or digital native, it's like something that just happens. You're doing it, and so that stigma I don't think can just keep kind of holding on in a way. And the other one I think is this thing about how it's isolative, right? That you stay in your own little dark cave and play the video games, you never interact. Well, you do interact some. But in this game Ingress, it's actually on the phone, and it uses your GPS. And so I went out in Seattle with a bunch of my students to play a round of Ingress, and basically all of these major landmarks are actually portals. And these portals, you go to these portals with your phone, and you can attack them or energize them or link them or do all kinds of things with them. And there's two main teams, of the blue team and green team. And so when I was out there, I ran into like 4 or 5 other people who were playing Ingress that I had no idea I knew. Like, we were both standing in front of this statue, like in a park, and I was like, attack, attack, attack. And my name is Nice Beard Man on the game. And so somebody else was on the other side, and they go, hey, are you Nice Beard Man? Yes. I was like, hey, could you link this to that? Okay. Hey, that's, it's like so wild. Like, I almost got run over a couple times. I kept bumping into people. But in a way, I think it's yet another leap that these ideas about what is even a video game is going to change and grow over time.
Good thing
So.
about mean beard man, or you would have told him no.
Yeah, exactly right. That's right.
I have a question about, just to bring it back to grounded theory. So after
Yeah.
you've like done this whole, it's like, oh, this has never happened, I've never seen this, and you do grounded theory, then you move on from it? Like, how do you, after coming up with these, do you return to grounded theory, or do you move on to something else? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I think it was like another question too. I usually find it that if I don't really understand a phenomena and I'm trying to read about it but nothing is clicking for me, that's usually when I personally go to grounded theory. And so, like with that other project, I got the grounded theory, but now I'm not using grounded theory to test that hypothesis. I'm actually using more kind of quantitative methods to say, okay, these are these distinct components that we're going to run in this group, but not in that group. So I get some independent variables, we get some outcomes, and we run it other ways. Yeah. So for me, I use grounded theory kind of as the start of something that's not really established. Yeah. Yeah.
I have one more question about,
Sure.
sort of related to that. So when you're going back to after you've developed the grounded theory and you're going back to the literature to, as you said,
Yeah.
either
Yeah.
resolve or not resolve, like just to see what's going on with what you've come up with in the literature.
Yes.
What happens then? I mean, have there been particular moments for you where you're looking at something to be like, oh,
Oh,
well,
they said it already.
they already said it.
Absolutely.
Or, like,
Yeah.
everybody else disagrees with this, then maybe then it's
Yes.
a huge contribution.
Yes, yes,
right? So talk about that process.
Sure, absolutely. So let's say in that same example, I save the lit review in grounded theory. You save the lit review to the end, till after the core variable comes up, and then you compare it to what's in the field, and then the grounded theory is constructed. And so, yeah, with that, I had lots of other concepts that I thought were super neat that came out of it, but they were already written about. But the other thing with grounded theory is that it's not, we try not to constrain it to, or restrict it to a field. So when I looked at stuff, I actually found a whole bunch of stuff in like, global business and intercultural communication and business and management and things like that. That held some theory that was nowhere in the psych literature, but that actually very closely applied. And so
you connect with other disciplines.
Absolutely. So that adds to this kind of exportability of it. And I would just write it up as this is the grounded theory, or this is the core variable that came up. This is what the literature says that supports it or challenges it. This is what it adds to it, and this is then the grounded theory that results. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions there?
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, please.
It seems like it would radically change how someone should do their dissertation then. Like, you should not be doing your comprehensive exams and then doing the research. Like, should you be doing the research first?
Yeah.
And then building your comprehensive?
Yeah, exactly. It throws all of that.
I know.
Like,
I know, right?
absolutely. It throws all of that off. Absolutely. And so, in general, I think that there's no hard and fast rule. You've got to do what you've got to do to kind of move through the structure of the program that you're in. This is basically what we say in the institute. But that we just want to derive those concepts, and we want to allow those concepts to emerge from the data from the folks who are actually dealing with it versus imposing our own onto it. And that's kind of the ideal that we're shooting for. So as much as folks can to sort of avoid doing too much of a lit review. But the thing is, you can't do a lit review on something that you really don't know what's going to show up, you know? And so that's the idea of who's going to do a lit review on scheduled voyeurism? You just wouldn't know that until you got to it. And so a lot of times I find that no matter how much people have read or done different lit reviews on different areas, almost always something new emerges that no one could have expected and is going to require a little bit more lit review at the end.
So it's not about just being like, oh, I'm just gonna, I don't know anything about this
Yeah,
at
it's not
all.
like this,
Yeah,
like, no,
right.
don't show me, don't talk to me, don't look at it, don't read it, don't click on it. Yeah. Yeah. All right, good. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you.